Thank you, ma'am. I think this is a fitting finale kind of panel where we are going to look into the future. So in a way, we can let our imagination fly because this session deals with how Indian real estate will look in 2030. What is the size? What are the positives? What are the new challenges that they will have to fight or we will have to fight? And what can be the technological challenges that, that might be thrown at the community of builders and developers. And we have, you know, a star cast over here. I think between them, this will be half the industry in terms of net worth and, you know, revenues generated. So a very, very representative, Well, I guess in terms of the land area developed, Mr. Hiranandani, you will count for a great deal. And so would the Tatas and an upcoming star in Sandeep Runwal. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining me. Well, first up, at the moment, real estate is 11% of India's GDP. The GDP will, what, we are at 263 lakh crore at the end of this year, FY23. By March 23, the estimate of the budget is that the economy will be about 263, 265 lakh crore. Chances are it will be near double to perhaps 550 lakh crore. I'm assuming a rate of growth of 10%. And as we all know in arithmetic, if it is 10% for 7 years, then you're going to double. So a reasonable chance of the economy being, you know, 550 lakh crore in 2030 is there. What will be the share of real estate? Do you see it going up? That's the first question. Mr. Hiranandani, would you want to tackle that?
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be with you and all the illustrious friends of the panel. I agree with you, with what you say in terms of growth, but unfortunately, Niti Aayog doesn't agree with you. They have said that in 2030, the share of real estate is going to be 17% of GDP instead of 7%.
I'm saying it's 11 now.
Yeah, so 17% of GDP in terms of growth, which is equivalent to about 7-8% today. So on an incremental value, it's going to grow. So I believe that the growth will be 20% compounded, not the 10% compounded that you see in the next 7 years.
If the GDP grows at 10% compounded, you're expecting that real estate
should grow at
20% compounded, yes. In which case it's quite good, clearly going to be double the size it is today. Now, you know, Abhishek, at the moment, the largest, as Mr. Hiranandani said, is a company like yours or DLF. And that is still what, 10,000 crore revenues? Do you think that we will see greater corporatization? We've already seen a little bit, but how do you see the picture in 2030?
Latha, the direction of travel on real estate in our country, as Mr. Hiranandani said, is going to be one of significant growth. And significant growth can only get delivered from those who have various resources put together in transparent and publicly viable frameworks. So is more corporatization likely? Are we going to see a significant amount of the growth coming from a handful of companies who will go to a much larger scale because they have the financial, people and technological resources? The answer is very much yes. So can you by 2030 see a company with 50,000 crores of revenues or 75,000 crores of revenue? I think the likelihood of that is quite high.
Okay, well that's good. That itself will mean that there will be greater professionalization, I would assume. Okay, now to you and to Sandeep in a sequence, how do you see, what would be the drivers? Would it be housing? Would it be industrial in the sense, you know, warehousing and data centers and BPO centers? What will be the drive? Will it, because you guys are into residential, how much do you think residential can contribute?
So typically across the globe, residential stock and residential activity contributes between 75 to 80% of real estate activity. So that doesn't really change too much depending on the stage of maturity of the economy, and that is very likely going to remain the situation in India too. The fact which is interesting to note is that India's per capita GDP is about $2,000 currently, and if we get to that 5 trillion overall GDP number, then India's per capita GDP will be closing somewhere between $4,000 to $5,000. And all of that additional $3,000 is purchasing power. And the biggest use of purchasing power is the mortgage, which allows you to build a capital asset much, much in advance. And almost every country in the world has done this transition from low income to mid income on the back of housing, because housing creates employment for the farm worker. Housing creates employment in the supply chain because everything from steel to tiles depend on it. It creates wealth in the supply chain for the owners of all those companies who supply, and it creates wealth for the homeowner as housing prices move up. So if India is going to really be a $5-6 trillion economy by the end of this decade, housing is going to play a very, very critical role. Overall real estate will, but housing will be a big part of it.
Okay. No, I think it should be 7 trillion by the end of the decade, for the simple reason that the government's ambition was 5 trillion by 24. It didn't work that way. COVID is at least partly to blame. But hopefully we should be, if it is 550 lakh crore, dividing by 80 rupees to the dollar, I think we should be at, maybe 7 trillion by 2030. Sandeep, what is your sense about residential? Do you think, therefore, we are going to migrate to larger houses? That's, from low income to mid income. Would that be the dominant theme? What are the themes you see in residential housing as of 2030?
Latha, the last 2 years, there has been a distinct movement towards enough space in their homes, and you've seen consumers buy larger spaces, larger homes, and I think this trend will continue for some time. You're seeing the economy grow very, very well. You're seeing the labor market, you're seeing the salaries, the increments, and you're going to see disposable income available in a larger way. It's definitely going to mean people are going to upgrade their existing homes. You're also going to see a huge demand in affordable homes for the first time, when there's a first-time buyer who continues to move to the 25 to 50 lakh rupee bracket. But Mumbai, especially South Mumbai, you've seen there is no stock available. You can keep saying there is a lot of inventory available, but if you actually want to go and buy, you won't get a house of your choice. You won't get a large space. And most of the projects today which are under construction are also quite sold out.
So what's your bet? That premium will grow faster and mid-income grows less and affordable grows least? Or is it the other way around?
So it can never, I don't think affordable can stop growing. Affordable will continue to grow simply because it is affordable and you have a larger market you're targeting to. Premium will not, the percentage of growth of premium will be lesser because of course it's a smaller market, and but it will remain very, very strong for the next 4 to 5 years to come for sure. The mid market has been doing really well for the last 2-3 years. 1 to 5 crore ticket size has been selling very well, whether it's Mulund, Borivali, in all the suburbs, it's been doing really well. And I think that will also continue to see a strong growth.
Oh, here we are again going to Mumbai. I mean, all 5 of us have this Mumbai bias. So 5 crore house in Borivali is the way we start thinking about homes. I'll come to you on the housing, Mr. Hiranandani, in just a minute. Let me get to the non-housing with Sanjay Dutt. You're better placed as well. Do you see this as, where do you see the drivers of growth? We hear data centers, and Mr. Hiranandani is best placed to speak about it. We also hear a lot more outsourcing happening now that remote is the way to go and that we are becoming the digital capital of the world. So what do you see as drivers to 2030? Can non-housing be much faster than it has been so far?
I genuinely believe the real source of business in this country is the talent. Right now, as you speak, there's a global war for talent. And the reason why we've seen quick return to office in the country, even during the pandemic when we saw 26 million and 30 million square feet in 21 and 22, and now expect 30 to 40 million square feet. So we are back at a time when the occupancy of the office is not more than 15, 20% or 50% in Mumbai, I was told. So why is that happening? Because majority of the top employers, which are predominantly from the IT, technology, banking, financial services, e-commerce companies, and more importantly, between the outsourcing bucket, the captives. So there is a term now, we used to call outsourcing, now it's called offshoring. So it's the global centers setting up their own captives in India, which have really gone up, which means higher quality tenant profile. So all of this is actually leading to us phenomenal growth. So we expect to breach 1 billion square feet in the next few years. and maybe exceed as per the jail report.
Office space, you mean, only
space.
office.
Yeah, office space. And these are in top 8 cities in the organized business.
So
if I
this
was to-
1.2 billion by 2030, which JLL has forecast,
Yes.
may be achieved earlier?
There is a strong possibility, and especially if you include cities outside the top 8 cities. The JLL report captures only the 8 cities. And our story as a country is way beyond. And this also does not include the IT companies of TCS, Infosys, Wipro, because they have their own land banks and their own campuses. So when you really put the opportunity and every 100 square feet of space which you and I occupy in the office requires 1,000 square feet of an apartment. So the exponential growth
In housing.
in the urban areas, to begin with, this story is all about the urban areas. Let's look at the logistics and the warehousing, which is the other segment, which will also be very job creating and therefore create opportunities for residential. I believe we may breach this figure much earlier than later.
Well, Mr. Hiranandani, to you, that's optimistic assessments we got from Abhishek, Sandeep, and Mr. Sanjay Dutt as well. You do both. So what's your sense in terms of 2030? Do you see a faster clip?
I always believe that residential will grow faster. There's no question about that. But in the short period that we have now, the next 5 years, I think the commercial also will grow faster, but that could taper off at some particular point of time. Because most of them, as Sanjay just mentioned, there's a question of outsourcing, there's a question of interest in India, whether we'll be able to maintain it throughout a period of next 7-8 years. There could be a dip in 1 year or 2 years, and there could be issues like that. So I would say commercial is definitely going to grow. But when we talk about a 20% overall growth, I think commercial could have its hiccups. For example, during the COVID times, there were lots of people advising me, don't touch commercial. People are going to work from home. Some companies announced that 75 to 80% are going to work from home. Some banks have said that we don't need any offices anymore. We're going to have people doing it at home. But the contrary has proved true, which is the growth of GDP as it begins to work again. The requirements of commercial space have definitely grown. And what Sanjay said, I would support him totally, that the offshoring and different types of requirements for commercial has grown commercial equally fast at this point of time. But you could see hiccups.
The percentage remains the same, you're saying?
The percentage could become a little, my view is commercial could be a little slower than the residential growth, because residential, we are still on a gap. Half of Mumbai doesn't have a house, and 3/4 of the people living in Jopatpatti can afford a house of the size which is there, because home loans are available and others. So people who are living in Jopatpattis actually can afford a house. So the question is that opportunity is going to come in the next couple of years. And when that opportunity actually comes up, you'll see an exponential growth in residential real estate, which is unheard of. That's my gut feel.
Oh, good. Sanjay, you wanted to add something since you picked up the microphone?
No, I think what Sir is saying is absolutely right. I think I just want to add few points. Globally, there are about 5 or 6 organizations who have more than 55% of the global workforce in India.
Yes.
And I remember at one time in my earlier avatar as an advisor, they never wanted to grow, and they wanted to put a cap on India at 30%. They didn't want to outsource to India and over-depend on India. They've already breached 55%. I know in next 4 years, they are likely to touch 65 to 70% of the global workforce in India.
Yeah, now with China +1, it becomes even more.
That's staggering. And the other change I've seen, earlier it was the cost arbitrage. Now, let's say for the purpose of example, they would outsource a very small function. Now they're outsourcing the whole product, the whole design, the whole R&D. So it's changed completely. So the story of India is far more powerful than we actually give weightage to. And not only that, I want to compliment the government. Even though we did have hiccups and issues managing the COVID, I think every government in the world failed. Let's admit that. And we have a lot to catch up in terms of how we deal with such issues. But they did a good job. So the logistics disruption that happened in China, the supply chain that got disturbed in China, that we did not let do that in the services sector. And therefore, that has built the credibility of the country so high that now you have opportunity in manufacturing, industrial, warehousing, logistic, data center, also partly because of the government's directive that you need to store
Yes,
data
data,
in
localization.
India. So it's, and then look at how the government and the foreign office of the country is managing the diplomatic nuances of the business environment. And then you look at the RBI, how agile they were when the COVID struck during the peak of the NBFC crisis, when they came out with these schemes
Yes.
to
The
provide
ECLGs,
liquidity.
yes.
I mean, this is a country which has really come of age,
Okay, yeah.
started doing extremely well.
Oh, I'm sorry, I had to time that out because we're getting away from real estate. Thanks for that. No, I agree that we thought there would be a big hiccup in commercial housing, in commercial real estate, but that probably has not been such a long hiccup. But I still think the millennial generation is way more prepared to work from home and is actually resisting office. This is the constant refrain in terms of news items that we get from Bangalore, where the 40 plus are insisting on come to work, and the 20 plus are threatening that in that case I'm resigning. So, and at the moment the 20 plus are winning. So we don't know. Perhaps the gap in what the Infosys and the TCSs may purchase is being filled by the greater outsourcing that's happening. But Mr. Hiranandani spoke about the large number of shanty households, Jhopparpattis in Mumbai, for instance. I'm sorry, again coming back to this city, which can afford, but it's not available. And Abhishek, since you were good enough to give me that hint when we were talking off the stage, do you think rental housing will pick up? The government announced it in the budget. We have not seen any moves, obviously, because of COVID and other priorities hijacking the government's bandwidth. But is that something that by 2030 may be a major reality?
Latha, across the globe, rental housing is a part of the housing mix. Not everybody wants to buy a home, and not everybody can afford to buy a home in the location which is good enough for them from a work, etc. perspective. However, what's very clear, especially in a country like India where aspirations are very high, that quality is very important. What we mixed up or gotten wrong in the country is both rental housing and for most part affordable housing is not quality living. And until we fix that, any initiative to put people in rental housing or affordable housing is unlikely to work.
Because the quality is not coming up to speed.
People want to live good quality of life. They are willing to make many compromises for that quality of life, and they are not willing to put up their families in a place which is not up to the mark when it comes to that. So yes, we do think that rental housing and affordable housing on ownership are both part of the mix, but they will have to be done in a quality focused manner, which I think right now the government is looking at numbers. I think over time they will have to recognize the fact that the numbers have to be accompanied by quality for this to make a real difference to India's lower middle class who really need this to build their lives in urban India.
Is that a polite way of saying you don't see it taking off?
I would say that it requires private sector involvement in thinking through it, and a few good pilots to be done across the country. I think Indians are very good at adapting. We talk in many different ways. So we can do it. I think India has the potential to do many, many things. We can do this too.
Is this a project you would think will succeed, since you are in the same, area?
Latha, Maharashtra government actually had introduced a policy of rental housing, and it did not take off at all the way it was envisaged. Primarily also because, like Abhishek said, the way you were planning the buildings and the way the FSI and the land was getting divided, you were just building vertical slums. And it was not making a great living place, and and it was also affecting the free sale component of the project. When you talk of rental housing from an international market, you have a lot of private equity players also who own rental blocks. A developer offloads it and then they actually rent it and they run it like a proper business. Unless you don't develop that as a business, I do not see rental housing taking off, and it's a very, very tough market for a developer to hold on. A commercial asset, you have corporates, you have limited clients to whom you're dealing with. As a developer, I am not equipped to collect rents from thousands of people. And I think the only way that will happen is when private equity starts to invest money into rental housing and becomes a model, which is again a yield-based model.
So at the moment, we don't see that as a big theme in the run-up to 2030 unless something dramatic changes in the thinking of the government and the people. Okay, let me come to an allied issue. The development of metros. Now, one of the big themes, I can't take up every infrastructure like water supply and plumbing that the previous panel so admirably did, but let me just take the issue of transport, which very much determines where you will buy your house, your accessibility, your ability to reach your place of work. If the speed at which metros are coming up in several cities, would you say land bank as a concept may recede and developers will start looking more like contractors? Sandeep, I would want comments from everybody over there.
So, Latha, as a company, we've never believed in land banks. We've always
But
believed.
it's a reality in India.
But you know, there are people who focus on land banks and aggregate land, and we've always believed that we are developers. We want to turn this inventory and stock around because we are going to keep producing and we're going to keep replacing it with new land. So holding on to a land, especially in today's market, is just not capital intensive, but it also takes away all the productivity your company can achieve. And it is very, very difficult, again, for a developer to hold on lands in his balance sheet anymore.
So saying for other reasons, land bank is anyway.
So a land bank
receding.
was a concept, I would say maybe 15 years or 10 years ago, when people used to actually get paid more or used to make more money just being unproductive and being inefficient. Today, I don't think any one of us can even think of holding on to lands and not develop them at all. The complete change is turn around the land as fast as possible, return the money back. You're all focused on IRRs, you're all focused on returns, and if you don't, the market just hammers you.
No, okay, let me change the question. Do you think the fast development of metros, maybe in Bombay is not the best example there, so I'm forcibly taking you all outside Bombay in your thinking. Abhishek, do you think it can change the grammar of the entire housing market?
Latha, as
No
the,
more do you have to stay near town or near BKC.
Yeah, Latha, I think there are some forces at play. I think one is about this work from home business, where the home is no longer a place to sleep, it's a place to live, where you'll work and do many other things. That's going to affect how far people are willing to live from the so-called CBDs. There is the whole idea of transportation, whether road transportation, metros, or so on and so forth, which as India becomes a richer country will keep improving, and therefore people will be able to enjoy living in slightly more distant places if
But
they
you
so
see
choose
that
to
by
do.
2030.
I think the fact of the matter is that Indian metros have to grow physically in order to accommodate the large-scale urbanization, which is inevitable in an economy which is going to be 7 trillion rather than 2.5 trillion. So yes, these cities are going to expand. Okay. And the transportation infrastructure, if it catches up, quality of life will be better. Alternatively,
But the grammar of housing will change. I mean, because it won't be so good to have a great deal of land in a city, say Bandra or.
I think even in the countries with the best connectivity, there is a certain draw to living in certain areas because of various reasons. It could be social reasons, it could be connectivity reasons, so on and so forth. So I wouldn't say that Bandra will no longer be Tony because the metro is operating very efficiently. But you have to imagine Bombay's population might double in the next 10 to 15 years. So it's not that people are going to leave Bandra, it's just that when more and more new people come, they have to be given good places to live. And if that is at some distance from the center of the city, that's fine because the transport infrastructure has improved to support them.
I forget the name actually, it was some American who said that staying close to your place of work never goes out of fashion. So, I mean, and those are perhaps cities with better infrastructure than we have. Mr. Hiranandani, therefore, let me flip that theme a little more. Since all of you are speaking about working remotely and work from home as something that has arrived and is not in a mood to disappear from our lives anytime soon, do you think we are going to see a faster development of tier 2 and tier 3 cities? Simply because you can give work out there, you don't need the employee here.
Certainly, you are going to see more cities. So when more cities develop as GDP grows, certainly tier 2 and tier 3 will definitely take it. But if you
We've
see,
been saying, I have heard this from when 1980, from the time I've been in school and college, that as urbanization grows, tier 2, tier 3 will grow. It hasn't for 40 years at least.
no, I think tier 2 has definitely grown. There's no doubt about it. But when you say tier 3 and tier 4, certainly has not grown equivalent. What I see different now is the emphasis on infrastructure in tier 1 and tier 2 cities. So you're going to see the periphery of Mumbai, Pune, NCR and all these areas grow much, much faster than you have seen in the past. So the growth is again going to focus around the peripheral of these areas rather than say tier 3, tier 4. So I don't think, that's why you'll see and other people, BFI, all these companies which are there, they're still focusing on tier 1 and tier 2 cities. And I think 75% of the growth story is in tier 1 and tier 2 cities. Yes, you will definitely get tier 3. When the whole economy grows, obviously tier 3, tier 4 come.
But this will still be the cream of the real estate.
No, but there is a, again, Niti Aayog report which says that 75% of the GDP growth will be focused around tier 1 and tier 2 cities, and that is why that infrastructure focus on 100 metro cities was done. But they have given in a written report that they expect that the GDP growth and the employment growth is likely to take place around tier 1, tier 2 cities rather than tier 3, tier 4 cities.
No, I'm asking.
I
take your point. For instance, Trans Harbour line. I mean, if that road develops, I would think the hinterland of Mumbai will grow much faster than.
Latha, let me explain to you only one short point. We are going to add as much land between Panvel and Karjat as equivalent to half the land of Mumbai, which is vacant. So the opportunities in the peripheral area of Mumbai is going to grow exponentially in the next 10 years, which is going to come next year. So it's 23 November when the MTHL corridor will get completed, and with all the metro and connectivity. I don't see the tier 1, tier 2 metro, cities going down at all.
I was really hoping either you or Sandeep would have spoken to Mr. Shinde about the metro. That would have changed the grammar of the pricing of homes in Mumbai rather dramatically. But that still looks distant. But I take your point. That it's a very important point you're making. Rather than having this romantic idea that tier 3 and tier 4 will develop, your expectation is that improved infrastructure in tier 1 and 2 will ensure greater development of housing, continues to be a theme.
People will stay in Alibag, for example. They will stay in Khandala and Lonavala. But those are very small numbers. I mean, when you talk about them going out into that area, look at the numbers. What is the city population?
I'll tell you what prompted me to ask you that question. On CNBC TV 18, we had a logistics company, a very important one. Actually, I can even tell you the name, TVS Logistics. It's not listed, so safe to speak. About 3-4 years back, he said logistics in India works, or warehouses, work only in tier 1 and tier 2. When we go to tier 3 and tier 4, there isn't even that much demand to support a warehouse commercially. So logistics is not working outside 3 and 4. The same gentleman 2-3 weeks back when we met him said that tier 3 and tier 4 are in business simply because of digitalization and e-commerce, and a lot of them over there able to buy stuff on smartphones. So that's why I'm asking whether tier 3 development, even if it's not 4, will be a theme in by 2030.
Yes, it will be. But the
it'll be subservient.
exponential growth that you see in the peripheral area. Look at Palava, for example. How many kilometers is it away from South Mumbai?
40.
No,
Not
more
much.
than that. 60 kilometers. Now, between Palava and, let's say, Navi Mumbai, you can have 200 Palavas or maybe 300 Palavas. So
Even when I was in college, Dombivli was not that far. There were children coming from, commuting every day. Our local trains were good enough at that time. It's just that now we want air conditioning, so it's not working. Yes.
I'll try and complement what Sir just mentioned. Actually, we created tier 2 cities in Manesar, in Hinjewadi, in Navi Mumbai, in Whitefield in Bangalore, and OMR in Chennai, and Gachibowli in Hyderabad. So these are tier 2 cities in a way, manufactured outside of the tier 1 cities, and I've studied those NASSCOM reports also for last 20 years. They have the data points that 40 to 50% of the workforce does come from tier 3 cities. So they know where the jobs are coming from. And they have tried in the past to set up centers in those cities, but it not worked.
Okay. All right. So take your point, Mr. Hiranandani. I think that's what everyone is endorsing. Tier 1 and tier 2 will continue to rule the roost even 10 years from now. probably due to better infrastructure. The satellite cities of these bigger cities are perhaps where we are going to see electrifying growth. I think you're all invested there, aren't you? I saw your board in Vasind. So I guess you're all invested there. Let me come to financing a bit, because I think even we should be closing for the 5 o'clock panel. So financing. At the moment, the biggest investments that all of us make are in the share market. Do you see REITs developing enough, both from the point of view of a developer tapping money and a common investor making money? Sandeep.
So a decade ago, there was no concept of REIT.
Yes.
And today, 50% of the commercial assets are REITable. They're already listed. And the REIT's valuation, I think, is around $50 or $52 billion. Going by the way commercial is picking up, we are looking at more than, 1.2 billion square feet of area being added. And I would assume at least 75% of that will get REITed out. So you would definitely see at least $130 to $150 billion of money going into REITs. And it also makes a lot of sense for a developer, because he can then hold on to his commercial asset to run it, and at the same time liquidate his capital and move on to his core potential of development. So you are going to see a lot of money coming into REITs and a lot of developers offering grade A buildings into REITs.
So fast cycling of money. But Mr. Sanjay, do you think it will become a common investment potential for the retail investor? At the moment, it's largely private equity and institutions who are investing in REITs. Do you see it becoming retail?
I think over the last few years, the education has gone through, and there is a much larger participation in the REIT. We currently hoping to add at least 300 million square feet of institutionally held real estate portfolio to get listed. Now, it will also depend on the first few REITs who are listed. They perform well, because many of the stock in the office market has to be repurposed, digitized, better managed, and if they don't do well, things can go off track.
So it's a potential theme. Let's not take it for granted. I'll try and cover one more theme which is dear to my heart. Is it, what do you see as technological innovations by 2030? Will you be building houses very differently, Abhishek?
Latha, technology in this sector is nascent. Having said that, I think there is a much faster pace of digitization when it comes vis-a-vis how do you deal with the consumer, and how does the consumer deal with you, and how does the consumer deal with the operations of the house that he's living in, and so on. So I think digitization is picking up. I think in terms of how the construction operations happen, given that India is going to scale up, in our opinion, the top 6 Indian cities do about 300,000 homes each year. That's going to be at least 10 lakh homes, a million homes each year by 2030. So there's 3x or more. So there is going to be a lot more, I would say, use of technology in standardizing production. Having said that, are you going to see a home, the evolution that you saw in the automobile from a standard car to the Tesla today, are you going to see that in the home? Quite unlikely.
You want to add to that, Mr. Hiranandani? You would have seen a longer cycle of...
30 years ago, or 25 years ago, we never saw cranes in buildings. Everybody used old lifts, and people...
You may see drones.
So you will see drones. So when this paradigm does take place, it just happens all of a sudden. So while I agree with Abhishek that the change is not likely to take place over here, but look at the labor. We can't get labor at all. And they say there's unemployment in India. But you ask me for plumbers, masons, electricians, carpenters, I cannot get even 50%, 30% of the labor that I need. So we may perforce change this particular thing. If the figures of this go up and we do not get labor, then automatically some change will take place. But I agree with what Abhishek says. Looking at what it is at this point of time, the way forward certainly doesn't look like there's going to be a paradigm happening as we have in terms of EV or Tesla. Or
I guess that's the simple point he's making. They're really gradual evolution, but there isn't any
but
revolutionary
you never know,
change happening.
things can change. The Russian-Ukraine war changed so many things for us. And
No, I
you
think
never
COVID
know
has
some news.
changed
If
so
somebody
many things,
comes
you
up,
don't want to predict anything. I agree with you.
But let's presume you get a technology which makes a factory-fitted home, like has happened in China, and if you can make it affordable and you can scale that model to us, maybe things will change. So I wouldn't say it won't happen, not likely to happen.
Fair point, fair point. Well, the final question that I want to take is, do you see a lot of other kinds of, residential property, not residential, but certainly not alternative homes, alternative residential structures coming in, like seniors' homes? We are moving into a situation where the middle class is richer. Of course, it's a small middle class, maybe 20%, 15% of India. It's not as large as it ought to be. But that class is richer, increasingly from 2 children to 1 child, probably a child that has migrated. So do you think alternative residential structures, entities like seniors' homes, can be very common in 2030? May I start with you, Mr. Dutt?
I'd like to make 2-3 statements first. One, homes will never be affordable. It's the rise in incomes which will ensure that the homes are affordable. That's point one. Two, I think as an organization, I made a statement some time ago that we will be a services organization in a development business. So we'll be a services company in a development business. That's the second statement, which basically means that in the times to come by 2030, the component of services in our development business will be higher. And therefore, I'm alluding towards the point that you made. Can we do senior living, student housing, et cetera, Also, by that time, I think the merit to do, which means cost of capital versus the yield, the negative spread versus positive spreads in residential will happen. Because it's extremely expensive to borrow capital in India. And the yields are just 1 or 2%, doesn't make sense. But I believe that this will actually, because the services component will become 5 or 6%, very close to office yields. And yes, it will move in that direction.
We have to wind up. We're out of time. Any final thoughts on 2030 that I may have missed?
So I just want to add to your previous subject which you were discussing. I genuinely think second homes is really picking up. Senior living is become a good business. I actually visited a senior living complex in Dehradun, and they were selling for 25,000 rupees a square feet. I could not believe it. And it was so impressive. And we actually had a session in the morning today on senior living. A lot of my friends are actually considering for their own parents something unheard of in Indian culture. So it could be a serious alternative.
You haven't visited Coimbatore?
I haven't.
Okay.
I think
All
I should.
of, I think, South India has their children studying abroad or working abroad. And it's a paradise, or at least it's a haven of senior homes, which is why I asked, I'm trying to sell the idea to Abhishek that in all his massive Nuke of Parade or Palava, he should seriously think of senior homes, because it is perhaps the next big thing. With parents not wanting to stay with children, or children not available around. Either ways, aided living will perhaps be a theme that will go. Do you think it will be a theme?
Latha, yes, I think as wealth increases and, for whatever reasons, family structures change, as you rightly said, senior living, Sanjay mentioned student housing, aided living. So all the things, all you need to do is look at the US and say India will get there in 20 years. We get there 20 years later, because that's just the nature of our economy. So everything that's happened out in the West, because our way of thinking and many parts of our society are quite similar. So certainly senior living is already picking up. You mentioned Coimbatore, he mentioned Dehradun. I think, there are some specialists like Columbia who are doing it in many parts of the country, and it will grow.
Okay. All right. So the big themes for 2030 are definitely larger homes. Mid-sized homes are likely to take the lead, with premium and affordable probably following. Residential still will take charge, but office space likely to grow in leaps and bounds as India becomes a major outsourcing or offshoring center. Technology unlikely to change much. Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities still likely to be the hub of development, and Tier 3 and Tier 4 will have to wait for their time under the sun. And finally, probably senior homes will be a big theme by 2030. Thank you very much for a very rich set of themes that you have put on the table.
Thank you.